We're back. I feel like I need to say that in a creepier voice because it is like Halloween week, but I don't have it in me right now. Welcome to Unlapped. If you're watching, you know us. Thank you. You've probably found us on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel. Like, subscribe. Love you. Mean it. If you're listening to us wherever you get your podcast, cool. Don't care. Just hit us up with a 5-star review. Nate's here. Laurence is here. I'm back. Guys, I'm coming off of an 18 inning World Series game. I am not firing on all cylinders. It feels like um I feel like I'm in college again. Worse, I see times now as an adult that I didn't see when I was in my 20s. Like I got home after 4 o'clock in the morning. What is that?
Yeah, I actually had a flight, connecting flight through Dallas. And when I first looked at it, I thought, oh, it's perfectly timed to watch the World Series game because we've been following it at the Mexico Grand Prix as well. And then, and then my flight was leaving. I was like, can't leave the screen. I can't leave the screen. But if I'd stayed there, I would have missed the flight by about
Yeah.
2 hours. It was that long. So, yeah, I mean, great entertainment. But I only woke up to the result this morning when I landed in London,
A
which
seven
was,
hour
which was
a
pretty
seven
wild.
hour game. We could have put in like several F1 races in that time. Anyway, it's good to see you guys. How was Mexico?
Mexico was fantastic. I think there's not many races that can follow up on Austin because, as we all know and love, Austin is pretty incredible. But yeah, Mexico can do it. It's got just this whole vibe, this whole identity of its own, mainly brought by the fans, it has to be said. But also the circuit, not great for racing, but it has this kind of like old school charm, and the baseball stadium that they've converted into the final sector of the lap is pretty special as well. It's not many places in the world. And it's great because you get the feedback from the crowds. So the crowds cheer, the crowds boo. We'll talk about that later. But
Yeah.
yeah, it really is an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in F1.
I like the fact that, we come off of the second to last US race, and we always talk about it how like all three of the US races sort of have their own vibe, their own feel, their own identity. And you leave Austin where it's just, stuffed bulls and longhorns and everything, and you go to Mexico, and Mexico is the exact same thing in terms of identity and vibe. Obviously there was also some drama in the championship. Lando Norris, once again, back out front. It's been a weird run for Oscar Piastri because I feel like there was a moment in time where it was like bet against him at your own risk. And like all of the sudden, there has just been this like shift where suddenly you can't take your eyes off of, dare I say, the growing villain that is Lando Norris. Like, what is your biggest takeaway from the championship fight after watching what we saw in Mexico?
Yeah, I think I was trying to think back to our post-Zandvoort show in September, and we were saying that exact thing. I listened to the beginning of it. We were saying, it's Piastri's title to lose at this point, and it is remarkable how it's turned around so quickly. I mean, if you'd said then that Norris would be back in the lead of the championship by this point, you would have probably assumed that Piastri would have had a car failure or something like that at some point. You would have assumed, oh, for a swing that big. Obviously, he crashed out in Baku. But yeah, it's been a remarkable turnaround. And I think that what is really remarkable about this now is that it has really turned the narrative of the whole season around those two McLaren drivers completely 180. All year we were saying, Norris hasn't really risen to the occasion of being title favorite. He hasn't really stepped up to that mark that we kind of wanted to see from him, to believe he was champion. And all year, right up until Zandvoort, when he won there, Piastri kind of looked like a mini Verstappen, very calm, collected, robotic, just cold-blooded. And then whatever happened after that, I mean, Lando Norris said he had nothing to lose from Zandvoort, and maybe that is what he needed just to change the mindset a little bit. But they've looked like completely different drivers since that point. Obviously, it's been muddied by a lot of weird McLaren internal things as well. But you've got to say that was probably Lando's best drive in Formula One. I can't, he was great in Monaco this year, if you remember that as well.
Yeah, different.
That was yeah, that was the Lando Norris that we all came into the season saying if he can be like that, he's going to be world champion. And yeah, I mean, what a time to turn it around. 4 races left, and he's back in the lead. It was April 20th that Piastri took the lead off of him in the first place. And at the time, then it felt like Norris's season was falling apart a little bit, and Piastri was the guy who was going to kind of steal the rug from under his feet. So Norris back on top. I'm now fascinated to see, with all of that in mind, how Norris deals with the guy being back in front. He's been chasing for a little bit. Now the pressure's back on him. He's got the lead. I know it's effectively a reset championship at this point. 1 point is is barely anything in Formula One, right? So now it's fascinating. But yeah, I just think it's so interesting how the two things have flipped around, and I think Lando Norris deserves his dues for that because we're very hard on him earlier in the year for the way he drove at certain points. I think certainly over the last two or three races, he's been spectacular.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think what is particularly impressive for Norris is that he's just been able to build this momentum over the last few races. Third in Singapore, second in the US, win in Mexico. And until that win in Mexico, you still had your doubts because, going into the weekend, he was 14 points behind Piastri. Verstappen was closing rapidly on both of them. It was quite hard to put together an argument that Norris was really, anything but the third favourite for this title. But he's just completely upended that narrative in Mexico with that victory and the size of that victory. Like Nate said, we've seen that before from Lando, where he goes and just absolutely dominates a race weekend. It's something that he's done a few times over the last couple of years, thinking back to Singapore last year, Zandvoort last year. But this was very good. But the other interesting thing which came out of Sunday night was listening to Andrea Stella, the team principal at McLaren, and saying why was Norris so good here and why is Piastri struggling so much? And he puts it down to circuits with low grip conditions. So Mexico is very much one of those because the tyres tend to overheat. There's not much downforce because the air's so thin up at 2,240 meters. And when the car is sliding around, moving on top of the surface of the track and just kind of a bit of a handful, Norris is able to take a few risks with it, push it to the limit, get the maximum from the car. If Oscar doesn't have it all underneath him, he's a little bit more cautious. There's certain things he doesn't want to do with the car. Certain corner entries he won't take because he's worried about what will happen on the exit. And like Nate said, back to Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, it was the other way around. The car was really well planted, loads of grip, and it was Lando that didn't know whether to trust it or not, wasn't quite able to maximize it, and Oscar could. So even though Lando has had this run of form and Piastri's really struggled, as the circuit types change, which they will over the next four races, there'll be some that go both ways. We could see that fight still flip and go back. So it's not that Lando's on his way to a championship and we'll crown him already at all. It's still super close. And it's not that Piastri's out of this championship. And then, of course, there's Max, who I think we've all agreed we never rule out.
I think the thing that amazed me the most was, I forget at what point, maybe it was after the sprint race. I caught up with Piastri in the pen, and he had said something that I had literally heard Lando say like earlier in the season, how he was like lacking the confidence in the car because he couldn't feel it under him. And that is literally something that we had heard Lando say earlier, and we'd heard Andrea Stella say it, and we'd heard Zach Brown say it about Lando, about as to why there was such a big difference. So like I get that it happens. I get that every driver has a different style. I get all of that. But it's just happening at a time when going into the weekend in Austin, when the McLaren team came out and they made things as muddy as clear as mud, when they were like papaya principles, whatever. Like they were talking about repercussions for Lando, and they made the situation where on Thursday, when we were doing this podcast and Nate was sitting on a bull, we were looking at each other and saying, there are so many things right now that seem to favor Oscar, even internally. And then over the course of a couple of days, it started to switch on its head in Austin, and then it completely changed on its head in Mexico, where there are parts of this to me that don't just feel like it's on track stuff. It actually feels surprisingly like internally, it's also gone by way of Lando. And like 10 days ago, we wouldn't have said that. 10 days ago, we were doubting Lando because of the repercussions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
but
was that
McLaren
was
actually,
curious, wasn't it? Go on. I'm sorry.
I would say McLaren actually got rid of those repercussions entirely off the back of what happened in Austin.
Right.
And I think there was a sense of relief from both drivers. Well, maybe not so much Oscar, but certainly from Lando, but the team itself as well. That rather than having this thing hanging over them through to the end of the year, that they could basically just say, okay, well, what happened in the Austin sprint race on the first lap kind of means that it's equal. They decided that Oscar, while it wasn't a wild move, what he was trying, it was his aggression to try and get back underneath Norris that led to the collision that then led to both McLarens being taken out. So I feel like they've reset that. And I mean, both sides are always going to look at every decision made from the team where it's 50-50 and think that it didn't go towards them. There's always going to be these situations where a driver feels slightly slighted by it, and certainly the fan base and the Twitter sphere and all that kind of stuff will look at stuff and have one view or another. But I stand by that. I do think that McLaren are doing a good job at trying to balance it as much as possible. A lot of people will now be looking back to Monza and saying that the 6 point swing that went to Lando because they asked him to swap positions is the reason that he's now 1 point ahead. Yeah, you could argue that, but then you could also pick through pretty much every round of this season and find little things that went one way or the other. And okay, they might not have all come directly from the team, but you still find reasons why Oscar's dropped points, Lando's dropped points. So, but it is that tight, and that's why we have all these kind of like conspiracy theories after every race, and the booing in Mexico, because people do get thoroughly invested in this, and they look at all the little things going on.
Well, before we go too far away from the booing in Mexico, obviously the boos, they can be a bit more nuanced than just what's on the top, what's just presented. So we'll just leave it there at that. But um for a long time, Lando has sort of been like, I'm just going to be me. I'm not going to sort of give up myself to be anyone different on the track. And he sort of puts off like this nice guy persona. There is a part of him now that does come across a little bit like he's embracing the villain role. Like, are you buying it, Nate? Are you not? Like, or is it just like circumstantial and that's just sort of the image that we're getting of him right now, that it's not really like he's not really villainous.
I don't know about the villain thing with Lando doesn't massively kind of compute with me, but I think the
Yeah, me
what
either.
he's doing, which is pretty good, is he's just letting it kind of he's just brushing it off. I mean, laughing at the booing, that's really all you can do in that situation. We were talking about this. We have a group chat with some journalists, and we obviously covered the booing because it became a story. But I've never, I've never shared the outrage that a lot of journalists have when somebody gets booed. I think for people to boo or cheer a driver, it shows they care. The worst reaction you could have is if Lando Norris went into the lead of the championship and there was silence, there was nothing, because it would suggest, well, no one really connects with this guy either way. The fact that those fans felt, whether or not the reasons for them booing are legitimate or not, I think that F1 fans love these conspiracy theories about one team favoring another. I agree with what Laurence said there. They've dropped a lot of points at different points. What I would say is the difference is Monza is the only place where McLaren actively intervened and, things, clearly on track were changed outside of racing. But McLaren explained themselves very well in that circumstance. And then it's down to whether fans believe them or not. I actually think Lando should fully embrace it. I think if that's how fans are going to react to it, who cares? I mean, look at Max. Max Verstappen's a great example. He's never cared what people think about him. And if Lando Norris is going to get booed and win the championship, or if there's going to be silence and he doesn't win the championship, I'd rather be booed. It doesn't ultimately matter. He knows in his heart how good he is as a racing driver. He knows how he's viewed inside the team. And I think that, the booing as well is always, you're going to get it in different places, right? I think that there is still a contingent of Red Bull fans in Mexico just because of Perez. Even though they got rid of him, I think they still have a great deal of love for Max, as Perez's old teammate. So there's part of that as well. And it is just kind of, you go to an event sometimes and, somebody wins who you didn't want to win. You're like, I'm going to make some noise. I
Right.
spent good money on this ticket to see this, and the guy I wanted to win didn't win the race. So I'm going to make a noise. I'm going to boo. So I don't think it's always, especially I think in the British media, it always becomes this big thing about, oh, this guy got booed and stuff like that. I don't really see an issue with it. And, it's happened before. I remember Rosberg getting booed. Lewis has been booed at different points. Like it depends where you go, right? So for Lando himself, I mean, the fact that he was just sat there laughing about it in that stadium section as it was happening, I actually was like, fair play. That's exactly how you respond to it,
Yes.
because the worst thing, the worst thing than seeing your guy who you didn't want to win the race is then if you boo him and he laughs at you booing him, because it's like a double hit to you. Like, oh, actually, also he's not reacted angrily. He's not got upset with it. He actually just doesn't care. So I thought it was a really smart way of playing it off. And with Lando Norris as well, I mean, he can be a hard character to read, Lando, because sometimes he opens up very well on mental health and stuff like this. I think a lot of people see, that I don't know, people have different opinions of how he is. Piastri, I think it's pretty much, what Piastri is, don't you? He's very, there's not really much like mystery about who he is. But Lando, with especially because he's so open with his personality as well, I think he's a real Marmite figure. I don't know if Marmite is a thing in the US, Nicole. I should really know that.
You have
But
a
it's like it's like
Marmite,
love it.
Vegemite. It's pretty horrible tasting,
Yeah, so people either
salty.
love it or they absolutely hate it. There's no middle ground with Lando, and I think that that's the kind of guy. He is, and I think Max Verstappen was the same as that. And I don't have an issue with it at all. And I think he's dealt with it very well.
I also think the booing thing, like when people are like, "Oh, clutch my pearls," like no, like it's you're not going to have passionate fans who
Yeah.
love you, who then also on the other side dislike you. Do you actually eat Marmite?
No, I hate it. I hate Marmite.
I actually
So
quite like
that's
it.
not a comment on Lando Norris, by the way, just to
No,
clarify.
I
I,
well, like
but Marmite, I don't like.
so Ryan, my husband, Australian, so we have Vegemite in the house,
Yeah,
and it's equally distasteful. It's equally
it's
rotten.
awful.
It's equal trash, like the worst. Um, Sorry, completely sidetracked because it's just
Well,
awful. The idea now that the pressure is on Oscar, how much are you buying that given? So for my, I guess that here's my perspective. It's not just that the championship lead has changed hands because it's one skinny little point. It's not an insurmountable situation. It's just that this was the guy not that long ago we were looking at him and saying like this is his to lose, blah 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 blah. And it's the fact that he hasn't had a good race. When was his last good race? So I look at a race weekend, I just look at the trend and it just feels like this is a bad time to be trending in the wrong direction. There are only, four races in a sprint left. This is a bad time to be losing everything that you had that made you the guy.
yeah, I mean, the last good race was the Dutch Grand Prix, which is 5 races ago. So that is quite concerning. You could make a case for Singapore. Actually, maybe he could have finished ahead of Lando had Lando not pulled that move. He qualified ahead of Lando, so the performance was there. Actually, before the accident in qualifying, the performance looked okay in Azerbaijan compared to Lando at least. So it's really the last 2 races where it's really gone. I honestly don't think it's the pressure because when we talk to him afterwards, he doesn't seem like a driver who's under pressure. He doesn't seem like someone who's struggling with the pressure. And it's not really been mistakes that have led to, I mean, there was in Azerbaijan, no denying that. But if you look at Mexico and the US, it's not like there was real obvious like mistakes on a qualifying lap or something like that. It's just that the performance hasn't been there. And as I mentioned earlier, McLaren do believe there's a reason for that, and it's the confidence in the car, which I don't think is coming from pressure. I think that's just coming from the difficulty with dealing with certain track surfaces, certain places where the tires are getting a bit hotter than maybe they do elsewhere. So I think that's what it is. But he really does need that reset, doesn't he? He needs to go to Brazil, and there's the sprint race and then the full Grand Prix, and he needs to be ahead of Lando in both of those, in my opinion, and ideally ahead of Max as well. However, I am not actually sure that Brazil's going to play 100% in his favor because it is a sprint race weekend. You get that one practice session. I think there's still a few things that that Oscar would love to just play with on the car. Use practice sessions to get more comfortable with. And he said after qualifying actually, and McLaren said this as well, that he did kind of get a better understanding all of a sudden. And that's why his race pace actually in Mexico wasn't bad at all. It's just that he was in traffic a lot of the time, and we know how difficult it is to overtake. But if you look at, what he was doing out there and the lap times he was able to put in when he briefly got bits of free air, it wasn't bad. It wasn't like completely off pace. So there's little kind of green shoots of recovery there. But I just think with 4 races to go, the pressure of 2 of those being sprint races, not having the practice sessions, he's going to have to absolutely nail it when he turns up in Brazil to just keep, to regain the momentum really going into the final few races.
Yeah, 100%.
I
I
wasn't
think
sure if Nate wanted to say anything, so I didn't want to like cut him off.
no, no, sorry. The only thing I was going to add was with with Piastri. I think you can look at it as him choking it away a little bit, but there is something to be said about since Zandvoort, he's almost been playing with house money in terms of the championship. You have a lead that big, 4 races off the podium, which Lando only had 2 consecutive races off the podium. As bad as we were making out his season to be, you look at Lando's results. Oh yeah, they've been pretty, consistently on the podium, like Piastri. For him to come through that whole thing and now just be at a level pegging situation with Norris. I think it's actually obviously you'd rather be still 20 points ahead, right, in the championship. But he could have come out of this spell 20 points down on Norris, and still be searching for form. The fact that he's got 4 races and it's effectively a 4 race sprint now to the championship, you know, knowing Piastri how we do, and everyone you talk to at McLaren say that, to Laurence's point there, he doesn't really feel the pressure too well. I don't see him having a big issue, but I do agree. I think he's got to come out of Sao Paulo with at least one of those races being ahead of Norris. I mean, you start giving up 7 points now, and that's, which is obviously the difference between first and second. That's really, really big, with the diminishing races coming up.
I do want to hit on sort of like you talk about passing was difficult, which is per usual, but there was a we thought we were going to have a good run to the finish until the virtual safety car came out. And I don't want to sit here and turn into this like let's rail against the FIA. We need permanent stewards, blah blah blah. But there were a few things that happened in the race from really lap one to the final lap of the race where you're wondering like what is the FIA doing? Like where's the consistency? Um, let's just start with what happened at the very end, because in a lot of ways, I feel like we were robbed of a really good battle between Leclerc and Verstappen. And it also could play out in the championship because let's just live in a world where Verstappen was able to get around Leclerc. That's what, 3 extra points in the championship that he didn't get because he ran out of time. So let's just start there. When the Williams looped it and parked it on the side, what was it about that situation that required a virtual safety car, Laurence?
Yeah, I mean, the other repercussion actually that there could have been as well is if Oscar had got past Oliver Bearman, he'd still be leading the championship.
Also, that I
Anyway,
forgot about that. Yes.
by the by, but yeah, the reason there was a VSC, well, science they say spun. The car was kind of he actually managed to get it in towards one of the gaps in the barrier. But if you look at the aerial footage of that, there was a kind of a rescue truck or something there. So he couldn't get it fully into that gap in the barrier, which meant the rear of the car was sticking out. Now it's a very slow part of the track. I mean, science spun there, but you so rarely see drivers make a mistake there, spin, certainly have a high speed accident. So you think, well, you probably could have got away with that to the end of the race with just yellow flags, like just leave the car there, have yellow flags in that sector, still allow, overtaking throughout the rest of the lap where most of the overtaking zones are. In fact, it's really only turn 1 and 4 where you can get it done. So it shouldn't have really had an impact on it. But then, to be fair to the FIA, the rear brakes on Carlos's car caught fire. Or suddenly there was signs of smoke and fire on the car. Now, then you end up with a quite different situation because if that car goes up in flames, it's in the middle of a stadium section, it's all quite tightly packed. Obviously you don't want that. Plus, you don't want cars going up in flames if you can help it anyway. And so at that point, they had to deploy marshals with fire extinguishers to put out the flames. And then you've got marshals essentially on a live track. And even in the slow part of the track, I mean, I spent a bit of time in that stadium section during the practice sessions. The cars still seem very quick and they still seem very close. And so if you have marshals outside of the barrier, you have to have a VSC. I mean, we've had so many we've had one very bad lesson from Formula One, allowing cars to race while marshals are still on track, and that came in Japan 2014. So I think anyone who's questioning whether there should be a VSC, well, if you've got marshals on the track, you have to have a kind of a VSC if there's the field spread. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, let's go back to the start of the race and the two marshals were on the track there. That was absolutely a mistake and kind of thing that should not happen. And the FIA are investigating that. That seems to be more of a communication issue between that marshal post and what was going on around the rest of the track. Lawson was away from the rest of the pack because he had pitted early, and therefore he was the one car that came out when the marshals were not expecting him to be there. That's an example where perhaps you don't need a VSC if you have cars on track. Because if they're all clumped together, you have enough time to get rid of debris and stuff like that. But what they'd overseen, or certainly the marshal post had overseen, is that Lawson was going to come out of the pits and be a lone car at the back. So that's exactly the reason why we do have VSCs in these kind of situations. And that's one that really needs to be looked into and fully understood and make sure that more safeguards are put in place. The FIA have a lot, race control has a lot, but more safeguards put in place so you don't have marshals that close to a live car, because it is scary.
Well, and that was the thing too. Like Nate, you said this, I think, on Twitter/X. The whole thing earlier in the race with Liam Lawson was not picked up on the feed that we saw here in the US. So there was a part of me that when the virtual safety car came out at the end, that I was wondering how much of that was based on what happened with Lawson. Like how much of the FIA they were like operating under like, well, we can't let that happen again. So we just have to throw the virtual safety car. Um, like the Lawson, I'm still trying to figure out how that happened. And is there any context at all other than like it was just a miscommunication between that post? Like, do we have any additional information as to why not one but two were still out there?
Yeah, it seems to have been a bit of a miscommunication because the FIA said that they had alerted them. And Lawrence, please correct me if I'm wrong on this. I'm just trying to rack my brain on the statement we got from the FIA. But Lawson was coming out of the pit lane, so obviously there was a gap where they could have, in theory, got out there. And it is a tricky thing. Sometimes you see them, they dash out. They've got a 30-second window and grab something. But it does seem to have been, a huge either misunderstanding or just a breakdown in communication. Crucially, and luckily, that's a part of the track where Lawson isn't screaming through that corner. It's a pretty heavy braking zone. But yeah, whenever you see that,
Terrifying.
it's just horrifying stuff. And
Yeah,
just to
so
hear Lawson, I mean, hearing Lawson's radio message on it shows you for those guys how scary that is. And I think sometimes the onboard can actually like, oh, I just missed him. You actually sometimes we see these cars come to the grid. There's a grid in the year where we all go and stand on the grid in Zandvoort, and you see the cars coming around the final corner and slowing down. And a lot of the photographers and journalists and team members stand there and watch them. I've never liked doing that because the speed they come at is just unbelievable. And I think all it takes is, you know,
One
for them to
snap.
spin. Yeah, one tiny moment. I mean, Lawson could have got wide through that corner, whatever. So really terrifying stuff. I think the FIA is looking into it. And yeah, I guess that's very easy to happen in a race where there's so much going on. But yeah, you really don't want to see it. And I
yeah,
think that the next race they're going to have to address what happened.
just for clarity on that, because I didn't really explain it very well the first time round. So the whole pack was going round, and there was debris on the track. The FIA, knowing that there was debris on the track, told that marshal post to be ready to go out on track and collect the debris once all the cars had gone past. Then Lawson pitted from the back of the pack. So the marshals were already ready, knowing that all the cars were going to come through. Lawson pitted from the back of the pack, and then obviously was behind the rest of them. So all the other cars went through. The marshals at that post apparently were alerted that Lawson would be coming later, but that message clearly hadn't got through to the two marshals who ran out on track. So they saw all the cars go through. They thought, here's our opportunity. We've got basically a lap to go and get the debris and take it off the track. But little did they know that the Lawson was coming through. So it's that miscommunication there where it seems like race director did tell the marshals not to go out because Lawson was still due to come round. But that message hadn't got through to those two actual marshals on the ground. So it was that miscommunication that needs to be looked into. And I think that's, something which we have seen before. It's not, a completely random incident, but it is so dangerous that's why, that there'll be more precautions. But if there's more precautions, it might mean that we get more VSCs like we had at the end of the race. I don't think you can look at the turn one incident on lap three and be horrified and then say, well, they shouldn't have had a VSC at the end of the race as well, because it's essentially the same thing. There should have been more care taken on lap three. There was lots of care taken at the end of the race. If it ruins the race, it's unfortunate, but that is racing. That is part of what it's all about.
But I also
And I've
think
got to
that that
just,
is the
I,
part where they need to have some transparency because there wasn't a lot of explanation. You guys got the explanation, but it hasn't been a well broadcast explanation as for what happened. And also the fact that the issue with Lawson, the two marshals, because it sort of trickled out, especially like here, the way that it trickled out the way that it did, it just led to, it was one of those situations where it just led to like, well, this is about clear as mud. And whenever you have anything like that happen, then you open the door for, like we've talked about a million times with McLaren, you open the door for conspiracy theories, you open the door for questions. If they had just come out and said, this is what it was, this is why it happened in a more broadcast way to provide clarity, then maybe it wouldn't have seemed the way that it did at the end of the race.
The difficulty that the sport always faces there is that Formula One, the kind of commercial rights organization, controls the broadcast. The FIA controls the running of the race and the event, and they're two separate entities. So, while the FIA, I'm sure, were somewhat embarrassed by what happened with the marshals at turn one, it wasn't their choice not to broadcast. So it wasn't the FIA trying to cover it up. Maybe F1 chose not to broadcast it, and perhaps that's something that you can put a question towards F1, but it's because you've got these two entities. So I don't think it should be seen as a conspiracy of the whole thing, because you've got a race director who's I think usually based back in London, calling the shots on literally what shots are put out there, and then you've got a race director sat in the race director's office in at the circuit, making the decisions on when we have VSCs and when marshals should be told to go and when they shouldn't be told to go. So I think you can look at all these things and start to say, oh, well, they were trying to cover it up and then they couldn't cover it up. But that's where it was. And then also, I think there is an element of the FIA has to fully understand what did happen in that moment before they put out a statement to the media. So they were fairly quick, the FIA. We got it. I think it's within an hour after the race of an explanation. We already had a story saying with Lawson's quote saying how dangerous this was, and then shortly after we published that, we got the explanation from the FIA that went into that story as well. So I don't know. I mean, like it clearly it wasn't handled the way it should be. The first incident. I think the second incident you can understand with the VSC at the end why race control did that, but. Yeah, trying to then turn that into a conspiracy theory of they're hiding stuff or that it's mismanagement. It's like no, there's humans making decisions, and actually the ones that are putting the pictures out are different humans to the ones that are making the decisions around the race action and controlling the race.
And Max made a very good point in the press conference afterwards, which I thought, kind of went under the radar a little bit. People were asking him, was it outrageous the VSC was thrown, it ruined your race? And people might know, maybe he was referring to a certain race in particular, but he said, well, look, the safety cars helped me at points in my career and it's also hurt me at certain points in my career. There'll be people listening to this who definitely agree with that being the case. And that is the thing, the FIA doesn't owe us a good end to a race. If something needs to be thrown for the safety aspect, they've got to do it. It was a shame the impact it had because that last stint from Max, by the way, was unbelievable. I was just looking back at some of his times.
good.
It was just superb. But yeah, that's just the way it is. So I was actually quite glad Max said that because it was quite, it was very Max, just like, yeah,
Also
sometimes it
very
helps and
funny.
sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, but yeah, shame because it could have been, and seeing Charles and Max go wheel to wheel, I always quite enjoy that. I think there's always, it's always one of the ones Max has to work a bit harder to get past as well.
Max obviously didn't have the weekend that he had in Austin, where it was essentially perfect, and he made up a tremendous amount of ground in the championship in the Austin weekend. He still did close the gap. I mean, I think we walked away from that thinking like the big news was the fact that, Lando is leading the way now, but Max still is closer. That gap is smaller than it was. How much confidence do you still have in Max going forward, given just just the way that the number of races left, the number of point scoring opportunities left, and the gap that exists between first/second and third.
Well, it's the first sign since Monza, really, where they brought a major upgrade to the car that it doesn't work everywhere. There was we were starting to think, and one of the reasons that we were all getting behind this Max, title charge was because the car was just looking quicker than the McLarens in every circumstance, and we went to different types of circuits. Singapore, very different from Austin, very different from Baku, very different from Monza, and Max was looking very, very quick in all conditions. Then we got to Mexico and we realized, that there are still weaknesses, there's still things that we don't understand. But what was incredible was that Max still managed to haul that car onto the podium and very nearly into second place. So I think that's why you cannot rule him out at all. And in fact, why there's still a very good argument as to why he might go and win this title is because he just does things like that. And I think a few things have to go his way now. I would say Brazil is probably a circuit that's going to suit the McLarens more. But we said that last year when Lando was closing in on Max, and of course I want to say, sorry, I was going to say pissed it down with rain, but it did piss
Rain
it down
cats and
with rain.
dogs.
And Max went and won, and basically just took the championship from that point. I mean, not quite literally, but certainly took any steam out of Lando Norris coming back into it. And so things like that could happen still. And if Max takes a big chunk of points out of the McLarens in Brazil, it is absolutely game on because Vegas is a race that I think is going to suit the Red Bull and then over the McLaren and then Qatar probably back the other way and maybe Abu Dhabi somewhere in the middle. So, if he can just keep chipping away, but he has to keep doing it. And he didn't quite get enough points that he needed from Mexico, but he did a really good job at damage limitation. And that's why I still think Max is a contender for this title.
Especially when you look at the forecast as well in Brazil. Just looking at it now, it's heavy rain all week this week, and then looks like rain on the horizon next week as well. So, I mean, that's a place.
I'm not willing to bet on that yet.
No, thing is, I think you, where Max is at as well, and given the fact that now the gloves are off type thing with the Piastri and Norris aren't fighting with any restrictions or anything like that. If they come together once, that's a massive open door, and McLaren can't step in and say don't race now. How are they going to tell their two drivers, hey guys, there's 4 races left. Can you just make sure you're careful when you're racing each other? I don't think that's going to happen. So I think Max is very much still in it, and he's probably in the most luxurious position of all of them. You'd obviously want to have the championship lead, but just being able to be that wild card against two teammates, I think he's in a great spot.
I mean, just the internal politics of having McLaren needing to balance what they have to balance. I mean, I thought it was funny too, just in the race in Mexico. They came on the radio at one point and asked Lando for his fair interpretation of which tire was better so that they
Mm.
could tell the other side. And at that point, I'm thinking to myself, that's stupid. Why even put them in that position? Because that is unfair. That's unfair to the guy who wants to win the championship to have him help the other side of the garage. So like, Red Bull is in a better spot in which they don't have to balance anything. They can just be like,
Mm.
go, do your thing.
McLaren have done that, I think, quite well though, in the fact that I think they've let it be known to both drivers that it is counterproductive in those moments to be selfish in terms of, if Lando suddenly says, I'm not telling you, I'm
Yeah,
not
but
telling
that's
you what that is.
fine. That's easy
Yeah,
to say. But that's easy
yeah,
to
yeah.
say. That's easy for it to be like that's what we're doing. And it's easy to even know that in that moment that that's counterproductive. But we're reaching a point in the season where, again, there are 4 races to go and a sprint race. It's a little more real now. It's a little less like, oh, in theory, I could win the championship. I
Mm.
think there's a part of that where it's like it's human nature where you're like, no, I don't want to help you. And it would be
Yeah.
weird if they
But
were
that's
like,
yeah.
let me just give you all the information. Like that's not what a competitor wants to do.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
so
and I think that's
surprised
what I
by that
mean.
call.
Yeah. I
And
think I think yeah, go on.
I would say
Sorry.
the other one that they really need to stamp out is what led to the swap in Monza. And I can't remember the exact race it was after that, but there was another race where it must have been Singapore, I think, where they asked the lead driver, "Are you okay for your teammate who's directly behind you to get the pit stop first?" And then the lead driver has a choice of yes or no. And obviously in Monza, that's what led to the problems because they asked Lando, "Are you okay if Oscar pits first to try and cover off Charles?" And and Lando said yes, but as long as he doesn't get the undercut, so as long as he doesn't get ahead of me as a result of that. And then of course Oscar did get ahead of him as a result
Right.
of that. So just don't ask the question in the first place. Just pit Lando first. Even if certainly by now, the constructors championship won, it kind of was by Monza anyway. I mean, they were not going to lose it from that point. But just even if it's a case of like you're going to put your overall result at risk. Just pit your drivers in order, kind of if it means it can't quite take the fight to driver in front, fine. But I think trying to meddle with all of that kind of stuff probably does need to stop now because also, I mean, if I was on the pit wall and Lando gave his honest assessment of the tires, I'd probably wonder a little bit how honest it was.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a bit too conspiratorial there.
We've made it all this way, and I don't want to overlook the weekend that not just Ollie Bearman, but Haas in general. I mean, they're double points weekend for Haas and Bearman just as much as I wanted the podium to sort of shake out the way it did for the championship, watching Behrman legitimately drive the way he did was a very cool thing to see. For Haas, for the 20-year-old who at times this season has looked like he didn't really know what he was doing or having some issues. What was your takeaway from what we saw from Behrman?
I think it's great news for Ferrari. Very uncertain season for them. Shows the pipeline. He's their junior driver. I thought it was fantastic, and we've been really blessed this year, haven't we, with rookies having breakout moments, and we literally saw one on track. When he had that when Lewis went wide, and then Max got wide and compromised Antonelli, and through it all, Behrman came through. I thought it was a fantastic moment. It's a really memorable spell in his rookie career. I thought it was fantastic, and it shows you how good these youngsters coming through are. I think all the rookies have had up and down moments. Behrman has been really impressive to the people working at Haas. If you talk to them about the way he's obviously he debuted last year with Ferrari, he had 2 races with Haas last year. The way he's come in and the way he's able to talk to them about the car, what he wants from it, the way he wants it to drive, I think they're very impressed with that. You always hear with Behrman, he's got old head on young shoulders. He's 20, but he comes across a lot older than that. And just a very likable guy as well, I think. When you talk to Behrman, very easy to root for him as well. So
Yes.
I think there's a massively good trajectory for him in his career. And yeah, I mean, obviously next year he's with Haas. All the talk we've had about Ferrari, Lewis is his contract year next year with Ferrari. There's been talk of what does Charles Leclerc do if Ferrari doesn't have a title-winning car. A lot of worrying things for Ferrari in the maybe in the short term. At the very least, they've got this, this hot shot driver coming through the pipeline. And great for Haas as well. I was gutted. Yeah, at one point, I was like, he's on for the podium, and I just completely forgot Max was on an offset strategy, and Max obviously breezed past him. But fourth position in that car, given I think people overlook the fact that the Haas team, the way it operates compared to the rest of the field, smallest team by far. I think they've actually got a lot better their operation under Eo Komatsu. I think that has to be said. But yeah, great performance, and yeah, just one off a really crowning moment in not just his career, but 9 years Haas have been on the grid and they haven't been on the podium yet, so it's equaled their best result, which is quite remarkable in itself. But good signs for them as well going into
I
next
also
season.
I also think like one of the sneaky parts of what made it so impressive for Ollie was that he wasn't an FP1.
Mm.
Here's a guy who like had in terms of I guess the weekend as a whole was like limited track time for him because they had the rookies in the car for FP1. He came out afterwards and was like, I disagree with that. I should have been in the car. I should have had the chance to be out there. Um, and he didn't. So I don't want to overlook that part of it because it just makes it's like an extra cherry on top of the impressive weekend for Ollie himself. Also, I really love like the videos and things like that we saw after the race where his family, like his dad is like super passionate anyway, like his dad and like watching his dad during the race is always so fun because I personally like I sort of feel that where you're just like you want to chew off your own arm to like will your person to like have that moment. But like the tears from his family, the tears from his girlfriend after the race, those are like the superhuman moments where sometimes it's easy to forget as a fan that those are people with real lives and families and like this was a really big moment for him and to see the support that he was getting from his family and his girlfriend was just it was cute and sweet and I love that might have been maybe my second favorite part of the weekend. I think my favorite part of the weekend was watching George Russell go into the stands. Is it like I'm wrestling's not my thing. It's like the Nacho Libre thing, right? That was the whole ensemble.
Yeah, the Lucha Libre mask. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There we go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. It was so good. Like the fact that he was able to go out there and do that. What I would like to know is like they posted the photo. I want to find the people in the stands who are next to
Who were
him.
next to him? Yeah, same.
Right. And be like, did you know the whole time this F1 driver was basically sitting right next to you? What would their response be?
There was a good clip as well of him. I think it's as he's walking around, he sees some Russell fans. He's like, "Hey, he's a good driver," and they're like, "Yeah, he's the best. He's the best." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, I agree." And walks on. Like, if you told them, that's when he should have dramatically
Just
revealed the
ripped
mask.
it
That's
off
the way. That's how to do it dramatically. But maybe next time.
in like a
I've got to
proper
say,
wrestling.
my favorite part of the race, away from all the drama, his radio message to Mercedes, the way he spoke, like when he was asking to move positions.
Yeah.
If
Your
if
way to
if
pass? Cool.
we
No.
always joke about how Americans can't do British accents. If any American can learn the George Russell accent, that is he sounded so proper the whole way through. Because at the end he's like, if I don't achieve it, I'm happy to give the position back. Like it was such a great message. And I actually kind of liked the way he delivered that. We talked a few races ago, didn't we, about the how baffling it was, the idea that Ferrari hadn't told Lewis he had to give the position back to Charles. That was another reminder of just how routine that is. He's like, look, let me go and have a go at trying to get Bearman, and then I'll give the position back, which he did. So I thought I love that radio message. I thought George recently has had a lot of quite entertaining radio messages. I'm finding them quite entertaining at the moment.
I actually found what Antonelli said after the race too. Did you see the video where he's like, "Ladies first"? We've been doing that a lot today.
Yeah, I've heard about this. I don't. I did. I think I missed the boat on the controversy, but I know Mercedes took the video down, so that always
They
suggests that
really?
there's a backlash. Well, yeah. So that's why you can't find it now. So I always feel like when you do that, it makes a story a bit bigger. But what was it? He came in and said ladies first, and his cameraman said we've been doing plenty of that today or something.
Yeah,
Is that what
and
it
then
was? Yeah.
there was a strong agreement from Antonelli where like you could tell like you knew exactly what he was talking about. I did not realize that they took it down because squirrel, I'll get distracted very easily, and if I see it once, then I pretty much that's committed to memory. That's a wild thing to do to take it down.
Mm. I
That
always feel like that makes it way worse if
It
you do
does.
that.
That is fuel to the fire. for all of that. Like, you just come on, like you can't do that. Once you hit send, once it's out there, it doesn't actually go away. Somebody still has it. We've all seen it. We're not like you can't gaslight us.
And I think as well, this shows you there is a massive element of Formula One fans now who, to use the Gen Z phrase, are just chronically online. Because if you showed me that video and maybe it's a British humor thing, I don't know, appreciating the joke, but he's clearly just there's clearly just a bit of fun about his teammate, right?
Yes.
I don't really think there's anything too bad in that. And there's people acting like, Anthony burnt the garage down or something, like
Right.
I don't really understand why
That's
that's
my
such a big
Charles. Oh my
why that's
God. I
such a
can't
big
believe
thing.
you said that. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
fine.
People forget that these guys all spend all their time together. That cameraman of
Yes.
Antonelli's, they'll interact with Russell. They'll be like, these guys, the interaction they will have together. I mean, maybe there is some internal rift that we're not, that we're not talking about, but you don't get that impression from the Mercedes team.
No.
Um, so,
No, I
and
mean
I
all the
don't know if
teammate
Lawrence has seen
pairings.
any of this. He's looking a little baffled at the whole thing.
No,
Um,
somebody mentioned it in a group. I hadn't seen it before I left Mexico, and then yeah, I think by the time I landed,
yeah.
which was about 4 hours ago, I hadn't seen it being taken down either. But yeah, I'd say of all the like driver pairings, actually, the Russell Antonelli one, because the positions are so well defined, in that George is the more experienced driver, the one that's been going out and getting results, and Kimi is still very much in a learning phase for this year at least. Has been very friendly. I don't think there's any animosity there. And if something like that was said, it would have been absolutely as a joke,
Right.
not
Yeah. Well,
as a severe
Antonelli
slight.
is your classic teen joker, isn't he? There was a video they put out. I was just trying to remind myself of it, where last week in Austin, he goes into the engineering room and he's like tapping Bono on the back, and he's like, Bono, 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 and Bono takes his headset
Like,
off. He's like, what?
mom,
He's like,
Lois,
yeah.
Lois,
Where they people put that with the Family
mom,
Guy thing of mummy, mummy, mum,
mommy.
mum, and then Bono takes his headset off and he's like, what do you want? Like, as if that clearly happens a lot, and then Anthony just says something stupid to him, like runs off or says, "What are you listening to?" or something. And so clearly, that it's a team that they go racing a lot of the time, but there's just that all these teams have a lot of good friendships and good that kind of energy around them. So it's always I always kind of roll my eyes a little bit when you see people overreacting to stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it was great. I think we'll end it there because Lawrence, when you took off last night, the game was still going, right? And
Yes.
it had at least ended by the time you landed. It did not last the entirety of your
Yeah,
flight.
I think they just entered the 13th or 14th innings when I had to
Got
turn
it.
off my phone.
Yep.
So yeah, I nearly got there, but not quite.
Got it. All right. Well, I think the Dodgers and Blue Jays are actually still playing. They're in the 94th inning of a tied game. Let's hope tonight does not end that way.
I
Just
was
for
going to say there's another game tonight, right? Which is mad.
which is mad because like I hate to bring another sport into this too much, but the way that, like the bullpen situation, you had Shohei Ohtani who like his like at bats were insane. The 2 home runs, the 4 extra base hits, and then they walked him 5 times. He was on base 9 different times. That man is their starting pitcher tonight. Like the whole just sometimes sports are amazing and sometimes the performances we get like we've talked about this before with Max, like we don't appreciate the greatness in the moment. I felt that way a little bit about Otani last night. Like if we're not appreciating the greatness in the moment, like we are clearly missing out. All right, that's enough of my soapbox. I'm done. Thank you for watching Unlapped. Thanks for listening. Remember, you can hit us up on the ESPN YouTube channel, like and subscribe. That's where you're going to find us and all of our F1 content all year round. If you're listening somewhere else, awesome, great. Just hit us up with a 5-star review. We get a week off, as do the drivers, because that's how it works. We actually don't get a week off. We'll be back, but they get a week off. So we'll have much more to talk about next week because we still have to unpack all that we think we're going to see in Brazil. Until then, Laz, I know where you're going. Safe travels. Enjoy. Can't wait to see your picks. Nate, I'll talk to you next week.
Yep, speak to them.
Bye.